Am I the a-hole for refusing to help my dad after he abandoned me for his new wife, who hurt me physically and mentally? It was just a regular day at work. I'm Max, 28, and I'm a lawyer now, which still feels kind of weird to say sometimes. I've worked hard to get here, and my life's been pretty steady for the last few years. I've got my own place, my own routine, and I don't think much about my past. Honestly, I like to keep it that way. I don't bring up my family unless someone asks, and even then, I keep it short. So, there I was, sitting at my desk, doing my usual work stuff. The office was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning, which was a nice change from the chaos of the courtroom. I was knee-deep in some paperwork when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, and it was an unknown number. I almost didn't pick it up. I mean, who answers unknown numbers, right? But for some reason, I felt like I should. So I did. Max speaking, I answered, trying to sound professional. There was a pause on the other end before I heard the voice. A voice I hadn't heard in over 10 years. Max, it's your dad. My heart stopped for a second. I hadn't heard from this man since I was a teenager. He disappeared from my life when I was about 17, and after that, I never looked back. I thought I was done with him. I had moved on, built a life without him, and didn't need any reminders of the crap he put me through. "Why are you calling me?" I said, my tone sharp, and honestly, I didn't care how cold I sounded. I wasn't about to make this easy for him. He hesitated before he spoke again, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "Max, I'm in trouble. I need your help." At that moment, my brain went from 0 to pissed in about 2 seconds. Help? Now he needed my help? After all these years? The nerve of this guy. "Seriously?" I snapped. "You need my help now? After all this time? You disappeared when I needed you most, and now you think you can just call me out of nowhere and ask for help?" "I know I wasn't there for you," he said, his voice shaky, almost like he was on the verge of tears. "But please, Max, I wouldn't be asking if I wasn't desperate." Desperate? The last time I felt desperate was when I was 17, standing in front of the door, waiting for him to come home after one of his disappearances, hoping for any kind of explanation. I never got one, and now he's desperate? "Yeah, well, I was desperate once too," I said, not holding back the sarcasm. "And guess what? You weren't there. So why should I be there for you now?" He went quiet for a second, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "I made mistakes, Max. I know that. But I'm your father, and I need you to help me out this one time. Please." Father. That word hit me like a ton of bricks. This guy, who had abandoned me when I needed him, still had the audacity to call himself my father. The guy who picked his new wife over me, who left me to figure everything out on my own, now suddenly wanted to play the family card. "You stopped being my father the day you chose her over me," I said, my voice cold. But I meant every word. "You don't get to come back into my life now and expect me to forget everything that happened." "Max, I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I let you down, but I really need your help. I'm in a bad place financially. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me again. Financially. That's why he was calling. Not because he actually cared about me or wanted to make amends. He was broke, and I guess in his mind, that was a good enough reason to reach out. "Money? That's what this is about?" I asked, my voice getting louder. "You don't want to reconnect with me, you just need money?" "Max, please," he started, but I cut him off. "No, I'm done," I said firmly. "You don't get to come crawling back now just because you need something from me. You stopped being my family a long time ago, and you sure as hell don't get to act like my dad now." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, like he was trying to figure out what to say next. Part of me wondered if he was going to cry or if he was just thinking of another way to guilt trip me. "Max, I know I messed up, but I'm still your father," he said, sounding almost desperate now. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. Can't we move past this?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the situation was so ridiculous I didn't know what else to do. "Move past this? You really think we can just move past everything like that? You walked out on me, Dad. You picked her over me. You didn't care then, and now you want to act like that never happened?" "I didn't know how to handle things back then," he said weakly, but I wasn't buying it. Yeah, well, I didn't know how to handle it either, but guess what? I had to figure it out on my own, I said, feeling the anger rising again. And I did. Without you. So no, I'm not helping you. You can figure it out on your own this time. There was another long silence, and this time, I didn't feel any guilt. I didn't feel bad for hanging up on him. I didn't feel bad for walking away from this so-called family. If anything, I felt relief. Goodbye, Dad, I said quietly before ending the call. I sat there for a minute, phone still in my hand, staring at the screen like I couldn't believe what had just happened. My mind was racing, going back to all the times I waited for him to come home, all the times I wished things would go back to how they used to be. But that was years ago. I wasn't that kid anymore. I had my own life now, one that didn't include him. And after that call, I knew for sure it never would. After that call with my dad, I couldn't shake off the memories it stirred up. It's been years since I've really thought about all that stuff, but once the door to the past opened, everything came flooding back. I mean, it wasn't always bad, you know? Things were good before Melissa came into the picture. And honestly, if it weren't for her, maybe my dad and I wouldn't have ended up where we are now, complete strangers. So yeah, before everything went to hell, life was normal. It was me, my mom, and my dad, and I actually have some good memories from back then. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had each other, and that was enough. My mom was amazing. She was always smiling, always there for me. I remember how she'd tuck me in every night, tell me stories, and make me feel like the most important person in the world. My dad was a decent guy back then, too. He wasn't around as much because he worked a lot, but when he was home, he'd play games with me or show me little things around the house, like he'd teach me how to fix stuff or show me how to tie a knot the right way. I guess in those moments I looked up to him. He seemed like a guy who had it all together. And my mom, man, she was the glue holding everything together. She was the one who made everything feel right. Even when things were tough, she'd somehow make it all feel okay. Our house might have been small and kind of old, but it was always full of warmth. I never felt like I was missing out on anything. I didn't care that we weren't rich or that I didn't have all the cool new toys. I was happy. But that happiness didn't last forever. When my mom got sick, it was like everything changed overnight. She was the strongest person I knew, but there wasn't much anyone could do when cancer came into the picture. I still remember the day they told me she wasn't going to make it. I didn't really understand it at the time, but I knew something was wrong. I mean, how could I not? Suddenly, she wasn't the same person, and no matter how much I wanted things to go back to normal, they didn't. My dad, he changed too. He wasn't the same guy anymore. It was like after my mom died, a part of him died too. He just kind of shut down, you know? He stopped caring about the little things, and honestly, I think he stopped caring about me too. Not like he was a bad guy or anything. He just wasn't there for me the way I needed him to be. I get it, in a way. Losing my mom was hard for both of us, but it felt like he gave up. And as a kid, watching your parents stop trying is rough. I had just lost my mom, and now it felt like I was losing my dad too. That's when Melissa came into the picture. It wasn't long after my mom passed that my dad introduced her to me. I remember the day so clearly. We were sitting in the living room, the same place my mom used to read to me every night, and my dad just said, "Max, this is Melissa. She's going to be staying with us for a while." I didn't know how to react. I mean, I was just a kid. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew something felt off. Melissa wasn't like my mom, not even close. There was no warmth to her, no kindness. She was cold from the start, and even though I tried to give her a chance, it was clear she didn't want anything to do with me. She didn't try to bond with me at all. In fact, it felt like she went out of her way to avoid me. If I was in the living room, she'd go to the kitchen. If I tried to talk to her, she'd give short, clipped answers like she couldn't be bothered. And when she did talk to me, it always felt like there was something mean behind it. Like she wanted to remind me that I wasn't important anymore, not to her and not to my dad. At first, I thought maybe I was just imagining things. I didn't want to believe that my dad had brought someone into our lives who didn't like me, but it became impossible to ignore. She'd do little things that made me feel like I didn't belong in my own house. Like, she'd make dinner and wouldn't bother to ask me what I wanted. Or she'd accidentally ruin my favorite shirt in the wash. At first, it was just small stuff, but it started to add up. And every time something happened, I'd try to tell my dad. But he never believed me. He'd just brush it off and tell me I was being dramatic or that Melissa was trying her best. It was like he didn't want to see it, or maybe he didn't care. I remember one time when I came home from school and all my clothes had been thrown out of the dresser. I knew Melissa had done it, but when I told my dad, he just sighed and said, "You probably left them like that." That was the moment I realized I couldn't rely on him anymore. He wasn't going to stand up for me. He wasn't going to fix things. And honestly, that hurt more than anything Melissa ever did. I started spending more time in my room just to get away from her. The house, which used to feel like a home, started feeling more like a prison. Every time I heard her footsteps in the hallway, my stomach would turn. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next thing she'd do to make me feel small or unwanted. I tried my best to avoid her, but it was hard. She was always there, always finding ways to remind me that this wasn't my house anymore. It was hers. My dad? He was just along for the ride, too checked out to notice or care. Looking back, I don't even know why he brought her into our lives so quickly after my mom passed. Maybe he was lonely, or maybe he just didn't know how to cope with the loss. But whatever the reason, it felt like he was choosing her over me every single day. And that's when things really started to change between me and my dad. I stopped trusting him. I stopped relying on him. I figured if he wasn't going to be there for me, I had to learn to take care of myself. It wasn't easy, but I didn't have much of a choice. I guess in a way, that's when I started to grow up. I had to. There was no one else who was going to look out for me. Living with Melissa wasn't just uncomfortable, it was miserable. I tried to adjust, tried to get used to it, but it became clear that no matter what I did, she wasn't going to accept me. And my dad? He didn't seem to care. It was like he wasn't even the same person anymore. He was there, but at the same time, he wasn't. He didn't notice the little things, and if he did, he just brushed them off like they didn't matter. The house that once felt like a safe place, where I used to laugh with my mom and play games with my dad, was now just a constant reminder that I didn't belong. Melissa didn't outright say it, but everything she did made it clear she wanted me out of the way. I can't even count how many times I found my stuff accidentally ruined. Shirts would come out of the wash all stretched out, or my school papers would somehow go missing after I left them on the kitchen table. But the worst part? My dad didn't believe me. Anytime I brought it up, he'd get this annoyed look on his face like I was bothering him. "Max, you're overreacting," he'd say, like it was nothing. And honestly, after hearing that enough times, I started to wonder if maybe I was overreacting. I mean, I was just a kid, and kids don't always know when they're being too sensitive, right? But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that it wasn't a big deal, that Melissa wasn't actually out to get me, it never sat right. Deep down, I knew what was happening, and I knew it wasn't normal. One day, things really came to a head. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my homework, minding my own business, when Melissa walked in. She barely glanced at me before heading straight to the fridge. I didn't think much of it until I felt something hit the back of my head. It wasn't hard, just enough to make me flinch. I turned around and saw a piece of bread on the floor. She had tossed it at me like I was a dog. "Pick that up," she said, her voice cold and smug, like she was daring me to say something. I just stared at her for a second, completely caught off guard. I mean, who does that? It wasn't like it was an accident. She threw it on purpose, and the look on her face made it clear she wanted to see how I'd react. I could feel my face getting hot, but I didn't say anything. I just picked up the bread and threw it in the trash, trying to avoid eye contact. "You need to learn to clean up after yourself," she said, walking out of the kitchen like she hadn't just humiliated me. I sat there, feeling this mix of anger and shame. I wanted to yell at her, to tell her to stop treating me like crap. But what was the point? If I said anything, my dad would just take her side like he always did. And that's what really hurt. Knowing that no matter what she did, no matter how awful she was, my dad wasn't going to stand up for me. Things kept getting worse after that. Melissa got bolder, like she knew she could get away with anything. She started making snide comments whenever we were alone. "Why don't you go live with your grandparents or something? This house is too crowded," she'd say, with this fake smile that made my skin crawl. I tried to avoid her as much as possible, but that wasn't always easy. The house wasn't that big, and no matter where I went, she always seemed to be there, watching, waiting for the next chance to mess with me. It was like she enjoyed making me feel uncomfortable, and the more I tried to stay out of her way, the worse it got. One time, she accidentally locked me out of the house after school. I came home, tried the door, and it wouldn't budge. I knocked, but no one answered. After about 10 minutes, I started walking around the house thinking maybe I'd left a window open. That's when I saw her through the window, just sitting on the couch watching TV. She knew I was outside. She knew I couldn't get in, but she didn't care. I knocked on the window, hoping she'd let me in, but she just gave me this smug look and turned back to the TV. I was furious, but what could I do? My dad wasn't home, and I knew if I told him, he'd just say I was being dramatic. Eventually, after what felt like forever, she came to the door and let me in. "Oh, did you need something?" she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. "I didn't hear you knocking." I clenched my fists, trying not to lose it right there, but I just nodded and went to my room. That was my life now, walking on eggshells, trying not to piss her off, knowing that no one had my back. What made it worse was that at school, things weren't much better. I couldn't focus in class and my grades started slipping. My friends noticed I was acting different, but I didn't know how to explain what was going on at home. It wasn't like I could just come out and say, "Oh yeah, my stepmom's a nightmare and my dad doesn't care." So I just kept it to myself, which only made me feel more isolated. The few people who did know, like my teachers, didn't really do anything either. One time, my math teacher pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home. I just shrugged and told her I was fine, because what else was I supposed to say? I wasn't about to tell her that my dad didn't believe me, or that I was basically living in a house where I wasn't wanted. I was too embarrassed. But the more I tried to keep it all inside, the more it ate away at me. I felt trapped, like there was no way out of this situation. I couldn't talk to my dad, I couldn't stand up to Melissa, and I couldn't just leave. I was stuck, and every day felt like it was getting harder and harder to deal with. I remember one night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how everything had changed. My mom was gone, my dad didn't care, and Melissa had taken over our lives like she owned the place. And there I was, stuck in the middle of it all, with no way to make it better. I guess that's when I started to realize that I was on my own. No one was going to fix this for me. No one was going to swoop in and save the day. I had to figure out how to survive this mess by myself, and that's exactly what I did. By the time I got to school the next morning, I was exhausted. Between everything Melissa had done and my dad not believing me, it felt like I was trapped with no way out. That night had been especially bad. Melissa had accidentally slammed the bathroom door into me as I was walking by, leaving a bruise on my arm. I knew it wasn't an accident. She did stuff like that all the time, just subtle enough that she could claim it wasn't on purpose. But the pain didn't just come from the bruise itself. It came from the fact that I knew my dad wouldn't care, even if I told him. I tried to keep my head down at school, just go through the day like normal, but something was off. I wasn't acting like myself, and people noticed, especially my teacher, Mrs. Parker. She was one of those teachers who paid attention, who really cared about her students, and I guess she noticed that something wasn't right with me that day. During class, I kept pulling down my sleeve to hide the bruise, but it was pretty bad. Even though I tried to act like everything was fine, I could feel the pain every time I moved my arm. I was just trying to get through the day without drawing attention to myself, but Mrs. Parker saw something was wrong. She kept looking at me, probably noticing how quiet I was or how I kept fidgeting with my sleeve. After class, as everyone was packing up to leave, Mrs. Parker asked me to stay behind. I felt my stomach drop. I wasn't sure what she wanted, but I had a feeling she knew something was up. "Max, can you stay for a minute?" she said, her voice soft but serious. I nodded, not really knowing what else to do. The rest of the class filed out, leaving just me and Mrs. Parker in the room. She came over to my desk and knelt down so we were at eye level. It was kind of weird. She wasn't yelling at me or giving me a hard time like most teachers would when you're in trouble. Instead, she just looked at me with concern. "Is everything okay, Max?" she asked, her voice gentle. "You've been acting different lately, and I'm worried about you." I didn't know what to say. I mean, what could I say? I wasn't about to spill my whole life story right there in the classroom. But then she did something that caught me off guard. She reached out and gently took my arm, pulling up my sleeve just enough to see the bruise that Melissa had left. Her eyes widened when she saw it. "Max, how did this happen?" she asked, her voice still calm but with a hint of urgency. I froze. I wasn't expecting her to notice, and now that she had, I didn't know how to explain it. My first instinct was to lie, to say it was an accident, that I'd bumped into something or fallen. But the look in her eyes told me she wouldn't believe that. "Did someone do this to you?" she asked, pressing a little more but still gentle. I could feel the lump forming in my throat. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, what was going on at home. But I was scared. I didn't know what would happen if I told the truth. Would they believe me? Or would it just make things worse? Mrs. Parker must have sensed my hesitation because she said, "Max, if someone is hurting you, you can tell me. I'm here to help." That did it. The words just came spilling out before I could stop them. I told her everything, about how Melissa had been treating me, how my dad didn't believe me, how I felt like I was completely alone. I even told her about the door incident, how Melissa slammed it into me on purpose. Once I started talking, I couldn't stop. It was like everything I'd been holding in for so long just poured out. Mrs. Parker listened quietly, her face serious, but kind. When I finished, she nodded and stood up. "I'm going to talk to the principal," she said. "We're going to get this sorted out." For the first time in what felt like forever, I actually felt a little bit of hope. Maybe someone would finally believe me. Maybe my dad would have to face the truth, and Melissa would stop tormenting me. But that hope didn't last long. The school called my dad and asked him to come in. I was sitting outside the principal's office when he arrived, looking annoyed, as if this whole thing was just a waste of his time. When he saw me, he didn't even ask if I was okay. He just shook his head like I was causing trouble again. We went into the principal's office, and Mrs. Parker was there too. I thought maybe with her there, my dad would finally understand what was happening. Maybe if someone else told him, he'd realize I wasn't making it up. But as soon as they started talking, my dad shut it all down. "Max has a history of making up stories," he said, his voice calm but dismissive. "He's a bit dramatic, always blowing things out of proportion. I'm sure this bruise was just an accident, but he likes to act like the world's ending." I could feel my heart sinking. Mrs. Parker tried to argue, but my dad was so convincing. He acted like he had everything under control, like he knew what was best for me. And for some reason, they believed him. The principal nodded along as my dad explained how I had a tendency to exaggerate things, how I was always looking for attention. Even Mrs. Parker, who had just heard everything I told her, seemed unsure now. By the end of the meeting, my dad had convinced them that I was just a kid looking for attention, that the bruise was just an accident, and there was nothing to worry about. I couldn't believe it. I sat there in shock as they all agreed to keep an eye on things, but essentially, nothing would change. After the meeting, my dad didn't say much. He just gave me that look, one that told me I was in trouble when we got home. And sure enough, when we did, he laid into me. "What were you thinking, telling your teacher those lies?" he snapped. "Do you know how embarrassing that was for me?" "But it wasn't a lie," I said, my voice small. "Melissa." "I don't want to hear another word about Melissa," he interrupted. "You're making things harder than they need to be. Stop being so dramatic." He didn't even bother talking to Melissa about what happened. Instead, he grounded me, telling me that if I ever pulled something like that again, there would be even worse consequences. I didn't say anything else. I just nodded and went to my room, feeling more trapped than ever. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how close I had come to finally getting out of that situation, and how it had all fallen apart. No one was going to help me. I was on my own. After everything that happened, I felt like I was on the edge. I didn't know what to do anymore. Staying in that house felt unbearable, but I didn't know where else to go. I thought about Alex's offer to crash at his place, but deep down, I knew that wasn't a real solution. I needed something more permanent, somewhere safe where I didn't have to keep walking on eggshells every day. That's when I remembered my grandpa, my mom's dad. I hadn't seen him in years. My dad made it pretty clear after my mom died that I shouldn't reach out to him. He said stuff like, "We don't need to bring him into this," or "Your grandpa doesn't need to be involved in our lives." At the time, I didn't question it. I figured my dad had his reasons. But now I was starting to wonder if maybe he just didn't want anyone else knowing what was going on at home. So I sat on my bed, staring at my phone, thinking about what I should do. Part of me was scared to make the call. What if he didn't want to help? What if he didn't even care anymore? But I couldn't stay in that house any longer, not after what Melissa said about my mom. That was the last straw. I needed out. Without thinking too much, I dialed his number. My hands were shaking as I listened to the phone ring. It felt like an eternity before he picked up. "Hello?" My grandpa's voice came through, sounding just like I remembered. Calm, strong. "Grandpa, it's me." "Max," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Max? Is that really you?" he asked, sounding surprised but happy. "I haven't heard from you in so long. What's going on, kiddo?" That's when it all came spilling out. I didn't even plan it, but once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I told him everything. How my dad had brought Melissa into our lives, how she treated me, how my dad never believed me, and how things had gotten worse over the years. I even told him about the awful things Melissa said about my mom, how she made me feel like I didn't belong in my own house. By the time I finished, I was crying. I hadn't cried in a long time, but this was too much to hold in. "Max, why didn't you call me sooner?" my grandpa asked, his voice tight with anger. "I would have come to get you the moment this started." "I didn't know I could," I admitted. "Dad always told me not to bother you, that you didn't need to be involved." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could tell my grandpa was trying to keep himself calm. "Max, pack your things. I'm coming to get you. You're not staying there another minute." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my backpack, threw in as much as I could, and waited by the door. My heart was racing, not because I was scared, but because I finally felt like I was doing something. I was getting out of there. About an hour later, I saw my grandpa's car pull up in front of the house. I ran outside before anyone inside could stop me. When I got in the car, my grandpa looked at me, and I could see the anger in his eyes, but also the relief. "I should have been here for you sooner," he said, shaking his head. "But I'm here now, and I'm not letting them hurt you anymore." As we drove away, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I didn't have to worry about what Melissa would say or do. I didn't have to feel like I was alone in all of this. I had my grandpa, and that was enough. Later that night, after we got to his house and I had a chance to calm down, I overheard him on the phone with my dad. I couldn't hear everything he said, but I caught enough. "If you ever come near Max again, I will call the authorities," my grandpa said, his voice firm and cold. "You had your chance to be his father, and you failed. Stay away from him." I didn't hear what my dad said in response, if he even said anything at all. But my grandpa hung up shortly after that, and when he came back into the room, he didn't say much about it. All he said was, "You're safe now, Max. Don't worry about him." And that was it. I never heard from my dad again. Not until that phone call years later, the one where he tried to ask for my help, as if nothing had ever happened. As if abandoning me for Melissa was something we could just move past. But by then, it was too late. I had already built a new life for myself, one that didn't include him. And I knew, deep down, that I was better off without him.